If you have grown up watching Toho's Kaiju movies from the 90s, chances are that you have come across this terrifying demonic oversized titanic entity known as Destoroyah. To give you a better idea, Destoroyah is basically like Doomsday from the DC universe. Just like the iconic DC supervillain was created for the single purpose of killing Superman, Destoroyah's one true purpose of existence is to destroy the king of the monsters, Godzilla. If you introduce any character for the sole purpose of killing your hero, then he is not really a character. He is just a plot device, a similar accusation thrown at Doomsday. In fact, Destoroyah was born out of the oxygen destroyer, which still remains as the only man-made weapon which successfully managed to take out the king of the monsters. So, in other words, Destoroyah is basically the symbolic living walking epitome of the oxygen destroyer, the same weapon that brutally killed the king of the monsters. Ever since the release of Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, the latest addition to Legendary's Monsterverse, Destoroyah is once again back in the headlines after almost 3 decades since his last appearance on the silver screen. And the reason for that is because the Monsterverse is slowly turning out to be one of the hottest properties in cinema, especially at a time when major Hollywood franchises are struggling to perform at the box office. Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire has managed to garner over $565 million at the box office, making it the biggest movie of the year just behind Dune Part 2. The Monsterverse franchise started a decade ago with the 2014 Godzilla movie with a vision to recreate the Showa era of the Toho Kaiju movies in a highly modernized setting. Back then, if I told you that a cinematic universe led by an oversized nuclear lizard would turn out to be the hottest property in Hollywood a decade later, you would probably laugh at my statement. But the Monsterverse has surpassed everyone's expectations and reached a point where they can seriously consider expanding into a major cinematic universe like Marvel, DC, and Star Wars. As a result of this overwhelming success, it is no surprise that Legendary Studios have already started the process of developing a sequel to Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, which as per reports is going to come out sometime between 2027 and 2028. What is really interesting is the fact that Adam Wingard, the director of GVK as well as Godzilla x Kong, has revealed that he wants the sequel to have a similar emotional tone like the 1995 movie, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. This is what basically led to a large section of Monsterverse fans to speculate that Destoroyah could be the next big bad guy within the franchise. Well, to be quite honest, I actually find it quite surprising to see people's reaction to this statement, because Destoroyah was always destined to appear at some point within the Monsterverse since the very beginning. I mean, this guy is the biggest arch-nemesis of the Big G, for crying out loud. You simply cannot have a Godzilla universe without Destoroyah existing somewhere. It is kind of like having a Batman universe without the Joker, or like Superman without Lex Luthor. Destoroyah was 100% confirmed the moment the military used the freaking oxygen destroyer in King of the Monsters. For those who are new to the mythos of Godzilla and Kaijus, let me brief you a little bit about the oxygen destroyer. It is basically a weapon of mass destruction invented by Dr. Serizawa with the intention to kill the Big G in the original 1954 Godzilla movie. It works by destroying oxygen molecules using a rare chemical compound called microoxygen. Pretty much everything on Earth, including Godzilla, has oxygen somewhere in its molecular structures. Destroying the oxygen molecules disturbs the atomic structure of any element, essentially causing the thing to melt. The oxygen destroyer still remains the only man-made weapon which was successfully able to neutralize Godzilla. Although the weapon did manage to get rid of the Big G, something terrifying was born from this, a demon beyond comprehension whose joy runs through death and slaughter, a destroyer of mass proportions. The effects of the use of the original oxygen destroyer showed up almost 40 years later in this movie called Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, which is in fact the exact same film Adam Wingard was referring to during his interview. When the weapon was first deployed in Tokyo Bay in 1954, it revived a colony of Precambrian crustaceans. Due to the prevailing toxic environment and the anaerobic conditions in the area, millions of these tiny poisonous creatures started to undergo mutations, eventually fusing into one single creature. As a result, over the course of 4 decades, the world had to witness the birth of arguably the most powerful kaiju imaginable, known as the Destoroyah. So in a way, as I mentioned earlier, Destoroyah is like the living symbolic representation of the oxygen destroyer, the one and only weapon that managed to kill the Big G. So Destoroyah isn't just your typical generic monster. He is literally the physical manifestation of mankind's hubris and want for destruction. Coming to the Monsterverse once again, the stage for the introduction for Destoroyah was well and truly set the moment Legendary Studios decided to introduce the oxygen destroyer in King of the Monsters. Why else would they introduce such an iconic fictional element like the Oxygen Destroyer and then 5 years down the line specifically mention about Destoroyah, the kaiju largely synonymous with that same weapon? Having said that, if Legendary Studios is smart enough and truly understands the character of Destoroyah, they should rather not have him introduced anytime soon. That is because Destoroyah has always been a final boss very similar to Thanos from the MCU. So introducing Destoroyah so early on and making him the bad guy in the next movie would be similar to making Thanos the main antagonist of the second Iron Man movie. Despite the last 2 movies turning out to be commercially successful, things still seem to be kind of shaky for the Monsterverse, and one bad movie at this point can totally ruin the financial stability of this franchise. Let me inform you that, in the Showa Heisei timeline, Destoroyah had to wait as long as 40 years to develop into a kaiju after the Oxygen Destroyer was hit in the first Godzilla movie of 1954. So, I think the Monsterverse at the moment should look to develop more original self-made monsters rather than relying on Toho characters. I mean, we all love the OGs like Ghidorah, Mothra, and Destoroyah, but I think the Monsterverse can do way more with its own monsters rather than being an American redesign like we saw with the Mutos and more recently with Titan Shimo, who was arguably one of the best parts of Godzilla x Kong. This would not only help the franchise to expand but also give it enough time to set the stage for eventually introducing Destoroyah. So, in conclusion, I would say that holding Destoroyah back until they establish a proper storyline to include him is the perfect option. The Monsterverse is undeniably in a transition period right now where the focus is less on the Big G and have been more towards Kong, especially during the last 2 movies. In order to introduce Godzilla's biggest arch-nemesis, you first need to establish and develop the Big G's story arc, which is what I expect the franchise to do over the next few upcoming projects. Having said that, I believe the franchise needs to start building up his eventual introduction right from the very next movie. If you remember, Thanos was introduced within the MCU way back in the first Avengers movie of 2012, and from there on, his story arc slowly and steadily started to progress over the course of the next 7 years. And that is exactly what the Monsterverse needs to do with Destoroyah. The best way to start the process is by incorporating a post-credit scene in the next movie, which starts out with the remnants of Isla de Mara, the ocean where the Oxygen Destroyer was detonated in Godzilla King of the Monsters. As the music slowly gets suspenseful, the camera pans down towards the depths of the ocean where we can see the skeletal remains of multiple fishes lying around. We hear ominous rumbling being uttered out by something. And then imagine the reaction of fans as the scene cuts to black, and after that, we hear a terrifying spine-chilling roar of a demonic entity from the depths of the ocean. I literally have goosebumps just by envisioning this whole sequence in my mind. Another really cool thing to do would be to actually modify and retcon Destoroyah's origins in order to make this version of the character even more dark and terrifying in comparison to its Toho counterpart. If you remember, in King of the Monsters, Godzilla was not the only one to be hit by the Oxygen Destroyer. It hit Monster Zero, better known as King Ghidorah, as well, which gives rise to a very interesting possibility. We can have this version of Destoroyah as an amalgamation of molecular particles of both Godzilla as well as Ghidorah. In other words, Monsterverse Destoroyah would be like a mix of Godzilla and Ghidorah, the 2 most powerful titans, which would be an absolutely terrifying yet awesome sight to witness for fans. What do you think about the sequel to Godzilla x Kong, which is now officially confirmed? And do you think Destoroyah could be the antagonist for the movie? Let me know in the comments down below. So, that is all I have to share in this video. If you enjoyed watching, please do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.